various tables, which means that I'm going to look for a volunteer of the first table who's going to do this. Oh, come on. Oh, there we go. Hooray. You'll need a mic.
All right, thank you. So the first question was, where does IoT stop and everything else kind of begin? So we have this diagram. There's our IoT devices, and some of them may connect to a hub or not, and they typically would connect to something on the internet somewhere. So we're kind of drawing a line between what you might have in your house, like the device and the hub, and once it leaves your house and goes to a service provider, that's now not so much part of IoT. Yes, for this work, yeah. Do you want to do the next one?
All right. The next question was what we can do within a year with respect to consumer protection. And we thought we look at this with a somewhat different approach and look at, first of all, where might the responsibility for various parts of consumer protection lie? And we came up with standards associations, network provider, vendor, government. The consumer could be the educated consumer, but we actually would much rather see a consumer that's only exposed to the KISS principle as keep it simple, stupid interfaces, as opposed to relying on somebody who is 85 to be a well-educated IT person. Then we have the manufacturer, and possibly something new that would be an independent maintenance service, another job, and certification bodies, the equivalent of CSA. So the next steps then would be to look at the list that we saw earlier in terms of what could be done, which would be, say, in-network cleanup. So that would be the responsibility of the network provider. Then we looked at testing. So testing could be done at the consumer side a little bit. Certainly the certification bodies would do testing, and of course the manufacturers would do testing before they bring something to the certification body. Research, for example, we didn't put colleges, universities here, but research could be done by manufacturers, colleges, universities, and government, and so on. So we would take, and eventually we ran out of time, we would take all of the different aspects from monitoring, certification, training, and so on, and group them around the responsibility map, and then look at what we could do within a year. So we're leaving the work half done today. You want to do the last part, please?
Sure. All right, and the next question about what we could do in a year for network resiliency. So we kind of looked at this from the network provider's side, where they want to keep their networks up 24/7, and they could do some monitoring to see what traffic is on their networks. So we could, well, some of the things that could happen would be to identify what IoT threats look like, and then trying to come up with security controls to mitigate those threats. And it's kind of a balance between having enough security while still allowing the network to be usable. So one example that was given was if your heart monitor is calling the hospital and it's screaming to say that you're having a heart attack versus your heart monitor screaming somewhere else to say you're under attack kind of thing. So somehow finding a difference between those two things and being able to block the traffic or mitigate it through some other means. I think that's it. Anybody? Would you like to add anything else? All done.
So I think what we're going to do, we're going to go around the room. I'm going to try to summarize, or we're going to try to summarize what everybody did, and then we're going to try to see, we're going to try to find the common themes and the areas of difference, and that way we'll be able to explore what our next steps are. So what table is going to go next? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm so bad at this. See, we should let you do it. So first of all, I want to congratulate you. You've looked at all of these things. You've come across the topics, and also, look, we've got some results here, right? This is a very hopeful first step, because we've got some proposals on the table. So now we're gonna go on to the next thing. So thank you very much. Now, who's my next victim? Right here. Here, I'll give you this mic.
Thank you. Maybe just stand up. It was really a group effort. We have one member who had to leave early, so just giving credit. Regarding the definition of IoT, we basically tried to simplify the definition that was given to us. We looked at the first part, which saw it as most relevant. And then we decided to use the definition of ISO, ICE, that they came up with in their standards document, 2924. Definition says, IoT, infrastructure of interconnected objects, people, systems, and information resources together with intelligent services to allow them to process information of the physical and the virtual world and react. So this is a definition, I think, that's comprehensive. Not too much criticism to it from our side, and we can see it as a starting point for IoT as a system, as an ecosystem definition, without going into the security aspects per se. Regarding the two other points, what we can achieve in terms of consumer protection and network resiliency. Regarding the first point, what we believe could be addressed even partially in the time frame is the public education and awareness side. We see this as very critical, and it has to explain in very simple terms what IoT is, what issues pertain to IoT usage in terms of human rights, privacy protection, identity protection, environmental impacts of using IoT devices, best practices / standards, and the term consumer protection in general. So this is public awareness campaign needs to be put together and can utilize material that's already in existence. We know service providers have material, like TELUS has material, ISOC has material that can be customized and reused, and other entities as well. So we don't have to start from scratch. In terms of network resiliency, we took a look at two aspects. We looked at the aspect at what role the government can play in terms of promoting industry adoption of certification and standards. Here we have a case in place that an industry sector took it upon themselves to come up with best practices and certification mechanisms of devices before they're deployed in their networks. The case of Hydro, BC Hydro, and this is being promoted across the country. So sector taking responsibility is something very positive as a best practice and should be promoted and encouraged by the government. The government itself can set guidelines of procurement of devices for government network deployment, public sector deployment, and set the example for this to the other private entities or semi-private entities inside the nation. Of course, testing and validation of products and solutions, that's a concept that's known for many, many decades. Some type standards have to be followed, and that's a role that government agency can play in to make sure that devices meet specific or certain level of specifications before they're allowed to be entered into the network, and security will be very much one of them. The second part of network resiliency is on the home network side. We see there's a lot of threat and issues coming from the home network being so open to access from the outside. And here, concepts of enterprise network deployment could be reused in terms of network segmentation and protection. So we can utilize technology and to protect networks through a home gateway that allows specific entities inside the network to access the internet. Other components inside the home network are protected completely from outside access, like the home cameras or other sensors. Such information should not be shared. Here we again follow certifications and standard and technology as they pertain to home network capability. And that typically will be an open source kind of initiative. If I missed something, Jack? Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. So one thing that I want to note here is that we're already hearing two tables in a row that have taken some issue with the definition that was proposed on the sheet. So that suggests that we're going to have to spend some time honing that definition or working on it for the purposes of the rest of this project, right? So that seems like already an emerging result, which is always promising when you get this. So thank you very much. Okay, who's going to go next? All right.
Okay, so our start was the definition. We found that instead of IoT by itself, it should be the device, maybe, because IoT sort of encompasses more than just the device itself. Generally, versus may when it's insecure, because there are devices that are actually secure now. So we didn't want to exclude those. And historically, we weren't sure about that, because how long is historical? Is last year's device now historical and it's no longer an IT member, or is it still in? So that's question one. For number two, what could we do in a year? Well, we're thinking we'll have to separate the problems into two different things, where it's personal and the internet itself. And it's a Canadian solution versus a global solution. So if a Canadian or Canadians all put these great new little devices on our network, what actually does it do? Not a lot, because unfortunately the rest of the world still can talk to us. So it has to be more of a global type of answer, I think. So we would need to come up with a solution that we would then promote, and possibly a white paper for Andrew had sat down with us and talked to us about whitelisting devices, and based on their footprint and how they normally operate and their capabilities. So if the device is running outside of those parameters, then maybe it's up to the ISP to shut it down and say no. Then education. So we thought the CSA idea was a pretty good one. If we could get branding involved, then maybe the consumer would, with the right amount of education to the public, would purchase devices that would be branded. You have your little stamp on it, and that might generate something with the manufacturer, because then they would want to get the stamp. And I think that's it. Anything I missed, guys? Nope.
Thank you very much. Oops. So this is another example where we're seeing some changes to the definition, but I want to point out in this case that we're heading in a slightly different direction, right? Because some other people wanted to broaden the definition of IoT or refine it, and in this case, what we're hearing is, oh well, let's cut the problem down smaller and just talk about devices and not talk about the whole Internet of Things. So that those are two different strategies that we're already hearing that we can talk about in a few minutes. The other thing I want to do is I try to give people information to the extent that I'm capable of doing that when it comes up. So the this device profile that was mentioned, when I dropped in on that table, there was some discussion about particular kinds of filtering and everything, and I was talking about this technology called manufacturer's usage description. So the manufacturer's usage description, or MUD, is a proposal in the Internet Engineering Task Force to for manufacturers to create profiles of their devices, and the idea here is that it sort of advertises on the network what it's supposed to do, and this has, you know, positive features and negative features. You can think of some obvious ones, like, for instance, now your manufacturer gets to decide what you get to do with that thing. I understand there are some, you know, tractor owners who don't really like that about their tractors, for instance. On the other hand, it has the positive effect that it comes with a profile. So rather than just getting a thing and it's a wide open computer and it's also a light switch, it says no, I'm only a light switch and I'll only talk to these things on the network. So that seems like an advantage. So that's the purpose of that. So if you want to know about that, it's the manufacturer's usage description and it's not widely adopted yet. The counterpart to that, though, which is I think what you were talking about, is the piece that what do you do with this information once you get it? And there's so far no specification about that. So that actually is the work that would need to go on if that were to be a useful technology. So that was just a little bit of context so that people had that, because I don't think everybody's heard of that kind of thing. Okay, thank you very much, group. That was excellent. Who's going to be next? Oh, we're at the back here. Who gets it?
Hi. Well, a couple members of our group bailed, but they were the closer it got to 2 o'clock, the smaller our group got. We hated that definition. We got to where it said IoT as any network exposed device. And oh no, it's not a device. Like, we're off on the wrong track right to begin with here. So we just Googled stuff. So we found one. I can read it to you, but you can really find anything, and didn't think we should spend a whole ton of time trying to define it. The one we found, I think it was IEEE, but I can't remember. It was an ever-growing network of physical objects that feature an IP address for internet connectivity and the communication that occurs between these objects and other internet-enabled devices and systems. We thought that was probably better than calling it a device. So, but we don't need that one. The one that was over there was very good also, and we could probably be happy with a number of them. On the consumer side, we kind of sucked. We didn't read the question properly, but we had a really robust discussion, and of the things we talked about, some of them can be done in a year, but one of the questions we faced was, what do consumers really want? How much privacy do they really insist on? Obviously, the whole Cambridge Analytica thing is waking everybody up to what's going on out there, and maybe we're moving towards privacy by design. This is Ann Kavukian's thing that we've been talking about for some time, but it may get accelerated. And, if you end up with some kind of an active default mechanism where things are turned off unless you turn them on, that may be a start. But, there's a cost to that. All these businesses that are built on automatically having people check the box, are consumers prepared to pay for the additional cost of much lower distribution and much lower uptake? So we talked about that for a while. What you could do on the awareness side, clearly with GDPR coming, there's going to be an increased awareness on the privacy side. Consumer education, yeah, you need more. It could be the CRTC, the OPC, Public Safety Canada already does some of that stuff. What about industry? Industry could do that. There's whatever, CCTX, I think the name is, group of carriers. There's that. There's the CSA that we talked about, and that seemed like a great start. Consumers already are familiar with that when they buy their electrical devices, so something tried and true, that could help. The smart cities initiatives that are starting already in Kingston and Stratford and other places, the waterfront in Toronto, I think you'll see a lot more of that going on in the next year, and a lot more education. They're starting to move towards open data. Again, how much are consumers interested in that? Right now they've got huge diversity of choice. That's a big thing for consumers, but it's a huge threat for the network, because you got all these different providers coming in with different appliances into your home. That creates opportunities and risks. So those are some of the things we talked about. Again, I'm not sure we isolated which ones we thought could be done in a year. We did talk about the fact that we got an election next year, so that anything that needs legislative change is probably going to grind to a halt in this city at least sometime in the next year. So not sure. Network resiliency, again, the CSA is a good start. It's not perfect, as was indicated, but it's a good start. You get the low-hanging fruit anyway. network designs are already evolving that will help reduce the DDoS attacks, but the way that's happening without us doing anything. The way it used to have a default from one network to another network, now it can go through a multiplicity of different networks when one or more is under attack. They're getting much smarter. So maybe we will end up with security by design, just like we're ending up with network by design. Instead of having everybody rush out, create apps, and do all these great toys, you actually back up and have a requirement that they actually think about security right from the get-go, just the way they are supposed to be thinking about privacy right from the get-go on the consumer side now. And if you had that combination, that would help. CCTX, again, could use use cases. They could imagine some of these things. That's a group of networks. They could figure out joint solutions working together, what would happen if, and put some of those things together. We talked about firewalls in homes. Clearly, that's a lot more complicated, and at least at the present time, requires more expertise than most homes have. And again, you got liability issues. What happens if you think you had a firewall in your home and you don't, and it turns out to get breached? So there was some of that. And whether or not blockchain, which is still in its infancy, might be a possible solution to some of this. But I gather Dell's already putting some of that stuff in. But with the IoT being an interconnected infrastructure, maybe blockchain is an answer, or at least as we get further along the curve. So that was what we did. And again, we didn't isolate what we thought could get done in a year and what couldn't. So that's where we are. Hey, Scott, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I note once again that we've got concerns about the definition. So we are definitely going to end up working on that. There is another theme that I'm starting to hear here, which has to do with separating different kinds of networks, right? That there seems to be some effort to talk about things that are in the home or within the sphere of the consumer versus the infrastructure that is providing things to the network. So that feels to me like another theme that I'm picking up on a few of these tables. So I wanna flag that as one of the things that maybe we'll talk about. Who's next? Was that your hand? Okay, great.
Yeah, we struggled also with the definitions. A lot of discussion about what it meant, mostly to do with the scoping that would imply on the definition. And one of the major questions that we came up with is, why are we making a separate definition? Why would we not defer to some of the existing definitions on INISA and NIST? And then if there need to be some particular qualifications, we could do so, within the year. So that way you're not adding a third or a fifth or 11th definition of what IoT is, because I think that's part of the problem, at least in my experience, and that seemed to be one area of consensus in the group. One of the few areas of consensus. So we thought certainly we didn't think that was a sufficient working definition, and we were pretty strong on that, and that's where we were on number one. On number two, we split that in two. We spent quite a bit of time on consumer protection, and we kind of got rat-holed down into the actual devices that would help educate the consumer, and maybe what properties we would provide them awareness on. And so toward that end, we suggested that maybe the confidentiality, integrity, and availability with privacy added in would be the four quadrants of the device. And then we sort of got into a debate of how far down the privacy rat hole we want to get, data privacy versus information privacy, and what to do about aggregation, because of course information is not data. And other people can assemble large constituencies of data to create information, which is what gives people the creeps. They're not worried about a particular element of data necessarily. So we got rat-holed a bit there. So that actually stole quite a bit of time, but we thought in the first year we'd be able to at least provide a proposal for a consumer device that would help educate them at point of sale, so they knew what they were buying, at least what the splatter pattern of confidentiality, integrity, and availability along with privacy might be. So that kind of stole a lot of time from our network resilience discussion, and I just kind of pulled together, and again, we didn't get to a consensus, so there's a risk and a danger, and you'll be able to tell by the faces of the people around the table what I'm about to say if I captured it correctly from what I heard. But we sort of thought that network resilience is more we could achieve a definition of a set of problem statements that were particularly aligned to their constituent sectors, because there's so many constituent sectors in the definition. You've got everything from public safety to bird feeders that are automatically run by your phone. I mean, they're totally different verticals and different injury tests there. So we thought that perhaps some existing techniques and practices that are already defined could be applied against some of those particular use cases of what the definition would end up being, and that might be something that would be achievable in year one, but we couldn't get commitment towards that. So if I see two people smiling, two people going, what the hell is he talking about? But so that was kind of what I pulled from what we were talking about. I don't know that we got to a point where we would be able to deliver a RACI or a statement of requirements, or a real definition of the full set of problem statements that are in the definition. So does that fairly capture it, folks? Okay, head nods, great. Thank you.
So I'm seeing a lot of nodding there. Thank you very much. Once again, we're hearing this definition is really getting beaten up today, so that's good. And then the other thing I want to draw is this consumer protection thread that keeps coming up. So this is something that I'm now hearing a great deal of. So thank you very much for this. I think this is great. Okay, here we are in the middle. Great, thank you.
Okay, I'll just go stand near our poster. So like kind of everybody else has said, we beat up the definition a little bit too, sorry. We thought kind of limiting it to being a network exposed device loses some of the nuances that IoT is, because IoT does include the devices, but it's also the infrastructure and all of the kind of enablers of it as well. So when you define it as a network exposed device, even for just a purpose, it kind of loses that context, which cannot be great in a policy context. So if you wanted to use that definition, we suggested instead of saying we will define, you can perhaps say this will be a focus. So what we tried to do here is really hone in on question 2 for enhancing IoT security in Canada. As Alan said, we focused on how in Canada we have some of the highest penetration rates. So maybe we shouldn't focus so much on the hardware because we don't build it here. So we could focus on what's very relevant here, which is consumer empowerment. So like we said, with the labeling, certification programs, stuff like that, and just kind of empowering consumers to do what they can to be educated on privacy and care just a little bit, even if it's kind of, oh my God, I'm so nervous, like data minimization and just the little things they can do to work towards understanding how to be secure. So we also said start working on the bigger picture in parallel, because like we said, we're kind of doing a ground up approach. So you start off with the consumer, and then you can go on towards business and industry practices, and then finally kind of get to the big networks and infrastructures, because you can't really look at consumer protection and network resiliency as something that are separate. They run parallel and they often intertwine. And we should also look at kind of what we're doing now, what we've done in the past, and what we expect of the future. Thanks.
So thank you. One of the nice things about the multi-stakeholder environment is that everybody's so supportive. And so you don't have to be nervous because, if you are, then you can always think of how I mess up like every time I get in front of everybody, and then, you have something else to laugh at. Something that I thought was really interesting here, which is something that we haven't heard yet, but that isn't contradictory to anything that anybody else has said, is this idea that the distinction that we were making in these questions about consumer protection versus network resiliency is is maybe a single or some sort of continuum rather than two different problems. And so that may be, I think that's something that maybe is implicit in what many people have said, but that was quite explicit in that. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, we have one more, I think, right? You guys haven't gone, so thank you. Who's up? All right.
We have this, but
And I just want to point out for those of you who don't have bad eyes like me, writing in green, never a good thing, because I can't read that at all.
so basically, we also, as everyone seemingly did, had some concerns with the definition. Our concerns were more on the cutouts with respect to how we defined whether there was sufficient built-in security. With respect to that portion, I guess our concern was, if you do a cutout like that, you're first looking at a point in time. So if we look at a device that has sufficient security today, but what happens tomorrow or ongoing as threats evolve? So we think that if you're going that way, it needs to have an ongoing and continual updates to be able to address threats as they evolve instead of a point in time capture. And our second concern regarded the fact that a device may have security, but if updates require any type of end user intervention, with the example being, I forget the brand, but there was a car out there with an automated device in it that could be hacked and then in turn taken over, and the update required the end user to either go to their computer, get a program on a USB stick, go to their car and upload that, or go to their dealership, then that's going to require significant end user intervention that this definition would not catch. With respect to the second question, with respect to what can be done, the first one with consumer protection, we very much saw the educational campaign as something that can be done in a year. Our views were more that there needs to be an impetus for anyone to care about this. Right now, we obviously all care, but from a consumer perspective, we're not quite sure that care reverberates everywhere. So to get anyone to care, obviously an educational campaign that covers off things about why consumers should care, what consumers should care about, and what they should be doing is very important. We also think from the second question about how to mitigate the risks and what can be done in a year, that is more kind of the research and scoping can be completed in a year, such as some of the classification items we've been talking about, whether it be MUD or type of certifications and classification of devices, but also scoping things like user best practices for information purposes, and some gap in research analysis, such as what's out there on liability, what's being used, mitigation measures for networks and otherwise that could be led on to year 2 or year 3 and beyond. So that's where we were on those 3 questions.
Thank you. So thank you very much. Now we have the online participants. I'm going to give you that mic. But before we do that, I want to draw out once again. Here we've got something that that starts to talk. No, I can't see it. But I'm glad you can, because that was good. This point about drawing things on, so you set a foundation in the 1 year for a longer term picture. This makes my engineer's heart sore, right? Because when you build something with a timeline of a year in a lot of engineering, particularly software organizations, right? What happens is the entire team breaks up after that, and it never gets maintained afterwards. And so we're all terrified whenever our project manager comes in and says, "Well, it's only a year," because it's never only a year. So I'm very pleased that I keep hearing people talking about setting that up for for future maintenance and so on. So thank you very much.
So our group was the remote participants group, and we had people joining via the live stream and via Zoom from all over the world, which was great. And we started off by defining IoT devices in general, and we said that they're displayers, collectors, transmitters of information, including sensors and actuators. And that kind of just laid the groundwork for how we approach the definition. And like every other group, we also said the definition was not sufficient. And we changed it. We used the basic framework that was provided, but we changed it to say that an IoT device is any network exposed device not maintainable that transmits data between devices and communicates with other devices, which generally lacks sufficient built-in security to protect themselves from causing or becoming a source of harm. And for the remote participants, that idea that they could both cause or become harmful was a really important part, as was the idea that this should be a forward-looking definition, and we don't know that they're just going to be connected via the internet. They might be connected via some sort of other device. Then we approached the 1-year question as a series of goals, and then we also broke it down into next steps. And the biggest goals for this upcoming year were to create a position paper on the issue that would be widely distributed to policymakers and industry leaders at both a national and international level. The group wanted to raise public awareness about the risks of IoT devices and provide resources for solutions. They want to lobby manufacturers to reduce vulnerabilities in IoT devices, showcase the IoT stars who produce excellent products and comply with a set of standards, research what sort of standards bodies already exist that could address this issue, and incorporate technical, engineering, and electric courses and webinars via some sort of educational and training tool, whether that be webinars or an educational course. As far as the next steps for all of those go, the group wants to approach groups such as IEEE and ISOC to create that kind of a course where people could get a certification at the end to show that they are thinking about privacy and security in IoT devices. And also for consumers to show that they are knowledgeable about how their own privacy and security works in the Internet of Things. We also want to, again, do the research on standards bodies to see who we can work with to implement our standards and also to create a set of national and international standards. And if a standards body doesn't already exist that could oversee this, then the group would like to create one. The next step for the paper would be to research what already exists, where other groups stand, and how far they are in this process, and then as a group see how we can get involved with anyone already working on these issues. They also want to determine what public awareness campaigns exist and how we can further their reach. If there are not widespread public awareness campaigns, then the group would like to begin one. Several on the call said there were specific organizations and groups that they'd like to approach to make sure that they are connecting with their constituents, such as the Canadian Manufacturers Association, CARP, and AARP. And then they want to create an award for IoT stars and convene panels to choose a product or vendor that would receive the star, and then give that star a supportive status at IoT conventions and conferences, use stars as case examples in publications, and start to uplift them in multiple ways so that other groups are incentivized to do similar work. And I think I covered it, but if anyone in the live stream thinks that I've missed anything, feel free to comment it in. That's it? All right, sounds good.
We have to wait for the lag, right, in case everybody hasn't heard that. Then they're going to comment in the live stream.
So far, so good.
Okay. All right, so thank you very much, and thank you for remote people for hanging in. So thank you very much. One of the things that I want to draw out from that was something that was very interesting. Several different tables talked about certifications, but it was generally about devices or networks or something like that. And this was certification for workers, right, for people who get certification in good practices and so on. One of the things that's very interesting is that you get security certifications and so on for people's careers. Maybe that creates a new avenue for careers themselves. So that is a really cool idea, I thought. Thank you. Okay, so what I think that what we can maybe start with. And now you're all going to get to see that not only can I not read, I can't write either. It's just completely impossible to read my writing, so I apologize for that. But I want to start with some common themes. And one common theme that I saw here was that people were dissatisfied with this definition, and people wanted to go in different ways. So one of the things that struck me about this, though, was that everybody was struggling to try to make the definition work for that 1 year horizon, right? People seem to like the 1 year horizon. So I'm going to start by asking, are there people who think that the 1 year horizon is just a waste of time, that that's just too close and we shouldn't bother with it? Yeah, let's do the mic, because otherwise the remotes can't hear.
I'm not sure if I understand your question. Are you saying that the definition itself should be bound to the time constraints of the, like, what we can do in a year? Like the definition of IoT should change?
No,
Or-
so what I was actually going to suggest was some people were struggling with that definition, either saying it's too big and unrelated to the year or whatever. So maybe the question, maybe if we recast that and say, okay, is that 1 year scope the right thing? Then we can, instead of talking about a definition of IoT, we could talk about what is the scope. And I think this was really a suggestion that came from the table right behind you. We should have given them numbers or something so I can refer to you. But in any case, this is the awesome table, like everybody gets a name. I see. So the idea here is to scope the problem and work on a problem statement. I think this came up when I dropped by your table as well, right? This idea of a scope statement rather than try to define IoT, which is maybe a rat hole that we don't want to explore too much. So that was sort of where I was going. But in order to break that into two questions, the first thing I wanted to know was whether anybody thinks the 1 year is just a foolish horizon, that's just too soon and we can't actually do anything useful within a year. So I've got people here who do. So see, what I didn't warn you is if you put your hand up in a multi-stakeholder environment, you have to talk. So you're
Okay, I'll try to say something that makes sense as well at the same time. Very much agree with a 1 year horizon, but you cannot do it without looking at the bigger picture. You need to start developing that now, and you need to start iterating that while you're doing what you're doing. Because otherwise, you don't know what success you have after the first year if you don't understand that bigger picture either.
Actually, I hope I'm not going to contradict you, Martin. I think certainly in my mind, we took the 1 year as fixed insofar as that's how long this process will last. So, and I just say certainly that informed our view of the definition. In other words, there's no point. I saw many of the tables broadening the definition because more general is more inclusive. We said, wow, we only have a year. We've got to shrink this definition so it's focused on something we can deliver in a year. So I think you're right, Andrew, to focus on this point right now, because I think that drives the rest of what we do.
Thanks. Were you here? So you can tell this table, we're all thinking about this in similar but slightly different ways. For me, 1 year is too short, but that doesn't mean it's not potentially useful. In talking about follow-on, it would seem to me you would take a piece of this that might not be sufficient if that were the end of your work, with some kind of outcome that you expect, with the understanding that you're going to pursue it on perhaps for another year, with better understanding of where you want to go, perhaps. And I think I would agree with Alan that there was some sense that we were scoping, our sense that we were talking about focus rather than definition. But in truth, I suspect that whatever we were doing, we would still want to think about focus. And even as we were kind of, quote unquote, scoping down, it was still an enormously broad field.
So is it fair that to say that we've got this common ground, that what we want is a 1 year horizon, but only if we do that in the context of something that is bigger? So people have a picture of what goes on beyond the 1 year, but are willing to concentrate on things that we would do that could actually be accomplished within a year. Okay, now if we agree on that, is there anybody in the room who thinks that there's nothing to do, that nothing could be achieved at all in a year? Going once, going twice. Okay, look at that. Consensus already. Hooray! And now the next thing that I'm gonna propose is that we've got something like a consensus that what we need to do here is not define the Internet of Things, which seemed to be a thing that people struggled with, but instead to define a scope that we can work on within that 1 year. So is there anybody who's uncomfortable with that? All right, so that's my second one. So, okay, everybody gets to pat each other on the back while I write this down, because what that means is in however long we've been at this, half an hour, we have managed to come to 2 consensus things in a room of this many people. And in my experience, that cannot always go well, right? You can go really pear-shaped in a room of this many people. So congratulations, everybody, and I'm going to write this down.
No. Check. Yeah, actually, because we were doing the same thing in ours, and we actually ended up writing like 5 different sheets of kind of elaborating considerations for the definition, the thematic areas, even the roadmap, what we'd do for a roadmap. And on the definition, what we were doing is we were trying to narrow down what it is we were looking at. As far as kind of your lowest common denominator or highest occurring perpetrator as far as an IoT device, and we outlined additional kind of points that you could use to classify that kind of device. So as far as looking at what is the processing power, does it have an interface? Can it be fixed remotely? Can an individual fix it themselves should they want to? So we were trying to identify more ways to kind of make that problem more specific. Look at one category or classification of devices, as you will, as far as our problem statement goes.
Yeah, sorry, if I could just add to that a little bit. Part of what we're talking about with classes as well was the notion of, because IoT is so broad, that you create or establish a set of classes of criticality. So at the top, you might have things like healthcare, embedded systems, energy-based systems, something in an aircraft or in transportation, where if it goes wrong, or it's hijacked in some way, obviously it's going to have a horrible outcome, right? Then a second class may be ones that contain or transmit confidential information or non-public information. So let's say it's involved in finance, for example, and contains PII or protected healthcare information, something along those lines. And then the bottom things is our toasters, our refrigerators, and whatever plugs and light bulbs and so on.
Okay, so this is good. I want to tug on this one a little bit because it's one of my hobby horses. This is the advantage of getting the chair, right? You get to haul out your hobby horses and show them off. So I like this, and it's a very natural thing to do, to try to put things into classification. So how many people think that that's a good strategy? Okay, this isn't voting, right? I'm just asking. It's just a sense of the room. You can hum instead if you want. That's what we do. Do you all know about this in the IETF? So in the Internet Engineering Task Force, because we don't like people voting, so instead of having people put up their hands, we get everybody to hum when they agree with something or oppose something. And yeah, there is this trick of like humming louder, but it doesn't really work. So if people feel really strongly about it, I can use that, but it's very unnatural for everybody else in the world. It's just an IETF weirdness thing. So this is a very natural thing to do, except I want to point something out about the Internet of Things. And that is, and I think it was one of the tables over here that mentioned it in what they had to say. There is this problem that you take this device and it's one of these classes, and you take this other device that is just a toaster, and you take this other device, and individually they don't have any kind of problem, but the very first thing that any network engineer is going to do is plug them together. And now, because believe me, like if I can put an internet interface on it, I'm going to put one on there. That water pitcher's getting one next. And what will happen is the devices will start to leak information even though they shouldn't have. And so if if we're going to expand things into this kind of class thing, then actually we've got a two-order problem. Because not only do we have to worry about the individual classes, but we have to think about all of the interactions among the things. And so then I'm worried about what happens there. But Martin disagrees with me, so where's the mic? Oh, there we are. I don't want to lose your sheet. Maybe you can stick to the wall.
Yes, no, you don't classify the thingies. You classify the applications on their security sensitivity, their safety sensitivity, their privacy sensitivity. If you only look at the chip, there's nothing to say. Gunpowder isn't bad in itself. It's what you do with it, and that goes for IoT devices too. So it's the applications that you would classify in a taxonomy, not the thing itself.
So which application are we talking about? The network application that uses this, the application of the sensor or actuator in the circumstances, both?
More and more, when we talk about these subjects in policy circles, we talk about cyber-physical systems, things that do something together, that deliver a service or do something together. At that level is where you look at it. And then the car is an example, is a system. It doesn't make sense to look at a part of that if you look to what the safety aspects for the car are. You need to look at it in at a functional level in a way.
But that's precisely what I'm trying to press on. So the car, if we imagine the network on the car to be one application, is the application by which you identify the lane that the car is in for the cars that are coming onto the highway in order to maximize the use of the highway a different application? Is that networking together of two applications, or is it a third application that includes all of these things, or which of those do you want to go with? And we have another hand here. So.
It's a very good example, what you just sketched. And I would say that I would classify the car in one category, and the network, so the highway or the city grid in which the car links into, as another category.
So another way I guess we could say, like application, I think not to get confused with like an OSI model or something, is say purpose, right? So it has an intended purpose, and when it goes outside of that intended purpose, that's where we should be looking from a security or a privacy perspective, that there's an issue. So it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 3 or 20 devices that are linked together. The point is it was supposed to meter traffic. When it ceases to do that and it's now taking money out of my bank account, as an example, or it's being used for a DDoS attack, that's where it's out of scope, right? And that's where we can alert.
So I don't want to beat this horse too hard. It's already starting to expire. But the internet, right? The purpose of the internet was so that various Department of Defense contractors could share computers at somebody else's university, and clearly it's gone outside of that purpose. Now I get it that like at that point what we got to do is analyze, well, what are the consequences of that thing? But I think what I want to press back on is that the whole point of the permissionless innovation model is precisely that you can get this kind of innovation that takes a piece of architecture and uses it in a surprising way and delivers a whole new piece of functionality that maybe you hadn't thought of when you designed the purpose in the first place. And that, in fact, is that's sort of what the story of the Internet of Things is. So if we try to nail this too hard to what the intention was when the thing was invented, what we're going to do is kill the generative nature of the internet, as I guess Zittrain calls it. So that strikes me as something I want to be alert to. That doesn't mean we don't do it, but I'm just raising that as a caution. Back there.
So what about if we would put a stipulation on new development and integrate ethics by design into any new application or device development? Ethical design principles. We talked privacy by design, security by design, maybe ethical design principles in terms of do no harm, etc.
Okay. I'm terrified of the implications of giving engineers the opportunity to write their own Hippocratic oath, though I understand that several of them have tried. So there's a point there. I'm not being dismissive.
So IEEE is trying to do that
Yeah.
with AI right now.
Right.
So there might be an opportunity.
So I've got 1, 2, 3.
I made the earlier point, the internet is a utility computing model, and it's a utility interconnectivity model, very much affected by the Metcalfe effect. So the more that's connected to it, the better value it provides. So rather than define all the use cases, which are infinite, provide similar utility models for security and privacy, and then the means by which they could be used to be attached to the application may be a more appropriate approach, since they're both in a utility domain.
Back to the ethics. This is where we run into if we do it at the global level. You can only agree to have an ethical approach. Understanding that it doesn't mean the same in every country. And that may seem a contradiction in terms, but actually it's the only way where you can agree upon. So if I explain it, I often refer to the permissionless innovation approach that IETF has, which basically means that everything goes, but only in a responsible way, from your own responsibility. Like you would be willing to confront your children with it, basically. That's the 10-second definition. So by not wanting to prevent innovation to happen, at the same time knowing that what we do has a global impact, all we can ask for ourselves is to handle in the most responsible way and be responsive to that. So you're able to explain why you did it in that way. So I very much support also an AI. There's no way we can tell what AI should or should not do. We can only tell what its purpose should be and continue to, as innovators, to be aware of that.
Sorry, I think the other thing I was just thinking with this is there's kind of two ways of approaching this. The one is where something is intentionally used for malice, right? So that's, a criminal getting hold of it and doing something bad. The other side is where it's unintended. And I think with that, you may even get in clusters. So, and this is probably something you react to. So a simple example would be, of course, the story of like the Fitbits that were being used to map military bases around the world, right? But it goes further than that. Think about like the genomics project and the fact that we actually wrote a Bill of Rights around that to protect the misuse. So what happens when, as an example, and I'm going to confess, obviously, one of my sins here, is if my insurance company gets a hold of my iWatch data and sees my GPS locations and then also can correlate to my credit card bill and suddenly realizes that I purchase an awful lot at the LCBO on a weekly basis, which would account for far more than the 5 drinks a week that I coughed up on my insurance form, right? At a certain point, you get to that predictive analytics or big data analytics where they can take it far too, or go well beyond that scope, and I don't know how you regulate or mandate that.
So I think this has been a very productive discussion, but what I'm not hearing is convergence on the classificatory scheme that we're going to use. So it seems to me that what we have here, I needed another chart, for the things that we need to, explore. Mark, are you taking notes on this? Oh, you were taking notes? Okay, good. So what I want to do is capture a different thing, which is stuff that we need to work on. There isn't another tripod is the problem. Oh, I see. You've got a built-in tripod. Look at that. I won't use the green one. I'll use the black one. Except turning it towards me is probably less useful, right? That's okay. This is good. Just do it this way. So here we've got... So what I've written here, for those of you who can't read what I write, is sort of things to work out, and one of them is this sort of classification scheme, how that would be approached, what kind of classifications you would do, and so on. And you don't believe me. So what's the why for the classification scheme? I thought that this was, well, let somebody else answer.
We need to classify IoTs in order to develop a proper threat modeling. And this has to be done in like cooperation between vendors or manufacturers and carriers. Because when vendors develop their threat model, they look just how they develop the product. But then when you work with the carriers or network providers, they actually look how do they deploy that product in their network. So I think classification is important because it's actually two different sides working together, like vendors on one side and network providers on another side.
Did that answer your question? Not are you satisfied with that? Did it answer your question? Yeah, okay. Oh, we got another.
Yes, but I'm sorry. I think what's implicit in classification is back to the definition, is how should we focus our work? So the classification will have 1 through 5. I actually don't agree with that classification, but certainly I think we have to back to what the focus should be. Should it be on the biggest vulnerabilities or the areas where the impact would be the greatest? And those are not the same thing.
Sorry, if I may add to that. So I think it should be based on a use case. Like for example, right now I'm working with the carriers. Some carriers have an interest in oil industry, leak detection, another in asset management. So these use cases would have different threat modeling, and it's important to actually bring industry experts, for example, oil, carriers and vendors together to discuss and understand security implications for all 3 different angles.
But I'm also making the point, if I have a webcam in my cottage and someone hijacks that to use it to deliver a DDoS attack, I'm not in any way threatened as the webcam owner. That's different. You have to decide who is being attacked and what's used to be an attack, and those are 2 different things.
I agree. Totally agree. Different threat model.
There's a big discussion on cameras, but mainly in saunas in the Netherlands at the moment. But one of the aspects is that came up in our discussion, just want to bring that forward because I think that's an important consideration too, is in the early 2000s, we started doing all this analysis of critical networks, critical infrastructures. It may be wise to redo that in the light of IoT devices and see how this can help to defend it, but also how this has enhanced the vulnerabilities.
If I may add, so actually I agree with that, and I'm not sure if you have anyone from CSC, but CSC, that's their mandate. So right now, we have a standard in Canada for the network providers. It is ITSG 33, which is similar to NIST standard developed in the United States, that they actually ask all providers of the critical infrastructure to deploy for the cybersecurity risk assessment. And this is what we talk about in here, that actually, based on a threat modeling exercise, we should be enhancing this cybersecurity risk model to include IoT threats. And actually, based on the threats, include the security controls to mitigate the risk from these threats.
So I'm just conscious of the time, and I don't want to because I don't want to solve everything today, right? I want to lay out what we're going to. I'm going to tee us up for the next things we're going to do, and so this still sounds to me like there are at least some people. This is the other thing about the multi-stakeholder model, right? If some people think that something doesn't matter and other people think it's valuable and they want to go away and work on it, then they can go away and work on it, and there's no harm in that. It's the internet after all. There's no boss. So so the nice thing about this is that it sounds like we've got some group of people anyway who think that there's work to be done here, that is a classification scheme for these threats, but we don't have what we can call consensus in this room that everybody wants to work on that right away. So that's not a result that we're all signing up to say we're going to go away and do this. There's a mic next to you, and we're going to do this quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I've been hearing is that on the one hand, you look at what systems pose a threat. We concentrated on the consumer being protected, but also being a threat. And then we are looking at the threats to different sectors, like oil and gas or other sectors. So I think there's different groups that are being impacted or are impacting other groups. So maybe we can look at it that way, and that way starting building barriers and mitigation strategies.
So I think you're right, but I still think that we don't have widespread consensus in this room that full topic is something that we're going to work on in the way that these two seem to me to be like really strong agreement. And so I want to turn, because it's 20 past here, I want to turn to another thing that I think was really strong agreement, which was something that people all seem to want to work on. Because we want to come out of here with something that we can say, oh yes, we're going to take some next steps there. And that one sounds like some people want to take some next steps. And what I think we need to do out of this is say, we're going to call for an interest group on that, maybe, or something like that, and people can work together online or however, or in future meetings to concentrate on that thing. But now we want to find something that we've got pretty wide consensus on. And it sounded to me, I think every single table and the online people all said that there was some kind of component having to do with consumer education or consumer understanding or end users understanding or something like that. So there was a lot of building understanding sort of mentions at the thing. And I didn't fully go through all of my notes, which I can read no better than any of you can. I can't write anymore, right? I haven't written anything on paper for like 25 years, and it just kills me every time I got to have paper. And it's terrible because I used to teach, university students, right? And I had beautiful writing on the board, but it's all gone. The key thing here, though, is that we got to figure out whether what we're going to do is a consumer education effort, is some sort of facilitating of some effort that some other people are going to do. That is, right, there were some people who were saying, well, we should promote things that other people are doing or an industry thing, and then the scope at which we're going to do it. So some of the tables were talking about consumer education in the sort of narrow sense of, you are the purchaser of this device, what do you want to do with it? I heard at least two tables who were saying, well, that's too narrow because you got to talk about the wider context in which the thing is working, what happens to the data, how can this data be aggregated, and so on. So I guess I want to sort of get a feel for people, like, where do they want to go on this? The first question I have is, do we have agreement that some sort of consumer education is a thing, that human, rather, very nice. Rather than talking about consumers, maybe I'll talk about human education so that we can step away from the question of whether it's only consumers. So we're going to educate humans, right? Does anybody object to that? Oh, we've got people humming and everything. I'm gonna tell the IETF about this, and then they'll all come to your meetings, and you'll really be sorry.
It's a very IETF-y thing. I don't know what question we just hummed for.
Oh, so what I'm asking is, are we going to make an effort to educate humans? Not consumers. I on purpose I set aside the word consumers because that has this built-in conclusion, right, about the function of the humans. But the humans who are somehow using these devices, I don't know if those are users or not. I'm always terrified of that word. Olaf's still looking uncomfortable.
No, I'm just tired.
Oh, I see.
I think it's a compliment.
I said I think it's incumbent upon us to do something in that area because I think it's a completely void space. And any effort, usually your first effort in any space renders the best reward. After that, it's the diminishing reward. So if it's a complete void, I don't know that it solves a person buying something cheap because it's in their interest to do so that turns around and ends up sending 1 packet per second at a healthcare device times 1.3 billion devices, but of a way to influence their decision-making process. Because right now, I think you don't, other than price.
On a more serious note, the instruments that you have to your availability, I guess this is one of the instruments that was in my slide deck as the final one. How do you do human education, to use that term?
I think you've got to sort of target the people who are buying it at the point of purchase. So inside when they get it, there's got to be some sort of, it's got to be a partnership with industry that says, when you give somebody a device that does this sort of stuff, A, can it work in dumb mode? Meaning, do you have to make it attached to the internet in order for it to work, or can you just have a fridge that doesn't talk if you wish to turn it off? And that's got to be a discussion that happens. But also, you know, the time is right now because of all of the Cambridge Analytica, because people are suddenly waking up to the fact that their privacy is at risk and that people have information that they don't know, and that I think it's incumbent on us to provide things, but I think you've also got to provide it in the way, like the problems that got us here will be the things that help us out, i.e. gamification, or the Cosmo quiz of which Disney princess are you, has to be the learning that happens that says, you know, why should I care? And here's a free quiz and you get this if you sign up and learn about that. So I think it's incumbent on us to make the learning really tangible, but also user-friendly. And so it's not just, you know, a training video by the guy from The Simpsons that says, you might remember me from such other training videos as, right? That we can really, like, but make it in a fun and compelling way that people will actually do it, which means it's not going to be on TV, it's not going to be by government, it's not going to be, right? It's got to be informative and entertaining, and we need to find the best and brightest minds. The you know, the John Olivers and the stuff are doing a lot of stuff on now about how to educate people about privacy and other things, and I think it's incumbent on us to sort of go into our comedian communities and help us communicate the larger issues of the day.
I do like the plan of jobs for stand-ups. So there are, I put down 4 words here to see whether we could, you know, converge a little more. And the 4 words, in case you can't understand them, these are all substitutes for the humans here. One of them is users, one of them is consumers, one of them is purchasers. See, even I can't read that. And one of them is developers. This idea was right, the certification of developers. That's and I really like that, but I don't know who's going to do it. So, but we're going to include that. So I think, does anybody agree that the users, consumers, purchasers set of questions and this developers one, does anybody disagree that those are different problems? Well, I don't know yet, but I'm trying to say these 3 versus the developers. The developers is a different class. Is that a fair thing?
I'm thinking the developer it's not the certification of the developer, but it's the secure software development lifecycle. It's looking at the open source software libraries, making sure they're secure, and so it should be part. They're humans. Then we.
Yes. So speaking with my geek hat on, I know they're humans. I know I don't look like one, but what I'm trying to say is that's a different kind of problem than the people who are going to buy devices and the people who are going to make them. Those are different efforts. Is that a fair thing? Okay, so we agree that those are separate problems. So that's good, right? See, more consensus. I know that this is sometimes laborious, but more consensus is better, right? You want to have more ones. So you can definitely tick that off as another thing we've decided. Different problems. Now, is there a difference among users, consumers, and purchasers? Yes, you say yes. Okay, why?
Because purchasers are often not the users. So I might buy stuff for my kids, I might buy stuff for my parents, and educating me is fine. But if someone can then take it home and press a button and suddenly it's dangerous again, I don't think that's enough. I mean, they might be different categories by age, but I don't think they're different categories. But you know, so there might be an educational program aimed at children, at the elderly, at, you know, others. I don't know what the proper term, yes, different stages of life. But I think if you only aim it at one of those, I mean, consumers is kind of an overarching thing that, oh, we didn't buy it, but we're using it. So it's kind of the halfway house between users and purchasers in my mind.
I just also think it's worth making a distinction between like large-scale institutional purchasers and this whole issue of procurement. Like a shopping mall or a prison or a hospital is going to have a very different framework for evaluating purchase decisions than like my mom is. So I think those are different audiences, and I think the procurement landscape is a place for really thoughtful intervention. I don't want to keep holding this. You can have it back.
I don't want it. Sorry, Andrew needs it back. He doesn't have one. Just drop it.
Yeah. Quickly add something. Just to quickly add something, I'm not sure that consumers gets us anywhere, but you're going to influence the purchasers, whether they're individuals or large-scale purchasers, not the same way, but you're going to influence them in different ways, depending upon the scale, and in a different way from the way you would influence users.
So what I've got here then is, and see, this is what I meant about my writing. I again apologize. These purchases break down into like institutional procurement, that kind of question, versus sort of individual humans. Or small scale things, home networks, that kind of stuff. I will point out that this line blurs faster than you would like, and the best example that I can think of there is something that all of you have experienced, I bet, and that is hotels. So hotel networks have overwhelmingly been made out of garbage that was supposed to go in your house. And over time, they figured, oh, well, that didn't work, and they've made it more and more complicated. But an awful lot of hotel networks are still cobbled together out of the very same, little bitty boxes that you would work on in your house, just kind of strung together through things in the walls. Particularly as the hotel gets smaller. Very large chains have sort of solved this problem, but little ones have not. And so this line is a spectrum, but it's a spectrum with ends that are vastly different. And so this seems to me, this distinction seems to me to be a problem that we're going to have to work out precisely how we want to work on that, unless everybody thinks that they already know how to do this. Is that a hand? Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that you've, having sort of ditched the idea of classification, you've started a new process of classification. And I'm not opposed to classification at all. But, I kind of think it's weird that we're here again, given the last discussion.
One of the fun things about multi-stakeholder processes is that they often turn up the same rock several times by different paths. But I think you're quite right that this is now a classification problem that we need to put into this bucket over here. Okay. It still seems to me that we've got pretty strong agreement that we've got to educate people and about purchasing, and what we've got, the further work that has to go on is educating people about purchasing, and what purchasing means and all the rest of it is now a problem that we got to sort out. I didn't see any. Oh, is that a no? Good.
No. No, not. So what you're trying to promise me as a consumer is that instead of looking up a recipe for, I don't know, roast beef, I can look up a recipe on how to keep myself safe on the internet. Can I?
I don't know.
And I can look it up every 2 or 3 months to get the updates.
I don't. So maybe you could say more about how you heard that, because that was not.
I'm just like, I mean, this would be my ideal, right? I mean, that I could actually go and look and say, okay, I've got devices XYZ, plug it in and get some answer back and say, this is what you need to do to keep yourself safe and your data too. It's a challenge.
So first, if you believe that is possible, I got this bridge I've been trying to unload for some time, because one of the problems, and I will say this, right? My employer isn't listening. I will say that every piece of software I've ever been involved with has things in it that we didn't know we did wrong. I mean, it just happens. And this is why you do so-called red team testing against your software, right? You hire somebody else who has the wrong assumptions as far as you're concerned. You know this inside out, right? You hire somebody else who has all the assumptions that you didn't make, and then immediately breaks your assumptions. And if you're a responsible manufacturer, you do that before you release the thing into the wild. Some people are not those people, but I think that it's important to recognize that I can't promise you, nobody can promise you, that this device is perfectly safe. So I first of all, I'm nervous about that. But with that said, I still think that was not what we were talking about just here, which was we were talking about, okay, you're going to buy something. How do you make those decisions? What kinds of things ought to go into your decision, into your purchasing decision, and so on, which is different from the ongoing maintenance problem. Did that make sense?
But we need both.
I was trying to make distinctions because I'm trying to make consensus on individual actions.
There's a place for the private sector in here. I'm sure they're going to find it, and I think I'm giving up my $1 million idea today. But in the same way that the insurance industry has now selling you a policy on so that if your identity gets stolen, there will be folks who will go out and who will do an audit for you in your house to, maintain your security. And I'm sure there will be a insurance package that comes with that. But they can, you'll have the geeks come in and figure out where you've got issues, in the same way that you let your computer out if you've got a virus. Like there's a whole industry waiting to be born, if it isn't already.
Okay, so yes. Oh, behind you.
Oh, thanks. So it's a question from over here. I brought up an important point about the safety of the IoT product. But the question has become, we've all been using software on laptops and mobile devices that has never gone through any certification. Most of them have never been tested. We use them all today, but now you put IoT around it and it's a factor. But our operating systems are open to attack. Our home networks are open to attack. All these things are, but they were never a factor till you put IoT label on them. Why is that? Right? No one questions here the applications that they're using. No one questions the backdoors that are in their operating systems or in their phones. Like, none of that stuff was a problem until it became IoT. Why is that? No, but no one ever made a demand of the vendors, for example. No one ever stopped buying a operating system or a piece of software because they questioned the security testing or the level of trust they had in that application. We didn't. We bought blindly.
I think the reason is when you use a software on your laptop, you're installing it on an operating system and you follow a framework. With the IoT devices, they're actually very easy to produce. You can buy an IoT device for $1. And they become very affordable, and there is no any security controls built into them. So I think this is the reason that we are so worried about IoT devices, because people can travel anywhere around the world globally, bring IoT devices like they can buy for $1 or $2 into Canada. So we have to figure out, is there a risk from that perspective. So it's not the same when you install a software on Microsoft or Unix, and when you bring $1 IoT device and bring thousands of them from Asia or elsewhere.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm trying to understand what we're actually trying to get into, because from my field, we're going into a small bit of an aspect of what we're talking about. Taking that back to, so where are actually the risks and how can we, in a systematic way, approach that? The thought that came up earlier is to go in from a critical infrastructure perspective, then assess the risks, which partly are with the way systems are used and with different systems. Maybe a way to drill down to, so we really get where the risks are and how to address them. In that context, I think it's just important that we recognize it's different layers. It's a chain of services that forms one service. And I very much like, in that way, that where you say, don't expect things from certain groups that you can't expect from them, and take the responsibility at the right level. But it feels like if we go back to the systematic level, and from there, these critical infrastructure owners have a critical interest in making sure that their infrastructures work as a starting point. And maybe that would be an excellent coat hanger for how we drill down to a first-year objective. Sorry, it's not really an answer to a question. But.
Right. So what I understood we'd agreed to is that we definitely want to educate humans, and we think that some kind of education program for developers, people who make these things, and maybe it's not just developers, maybe it's also packagers and so on, but that's maybe a detail that we don't need to worry about right now, is one kind of thing. And then we've got some kind of agreement about purchasing, and we got to figure out what that, the part that we haven't done is what purchasing means in all these contexts. But that's a classification thing that I think you're quite correct. We've stumbled on it again. The last bit that wasn't clear to me is whether there's an important distinction here between the consumers of this thing. And I think we already had this point that the purchasers are not necessarily the consumers, because, right, probably none of you purchased your office desk, but you probably consume it. So that's definitely a distinction. But then there's this question about whether the consumers and the users are different things. And the reason I made that distinction is because the user of the device might be somebody who just happens, to be happens to have it or whatever. But the consumers may be the people who are receiving the data from there. And I guess that wasn't clear to me whether that was what we were trying to include or not. My feeling was that was not a thing we were trying to include. And what we were really talking about here in this humans thing was people who were somehow using a device or having it or deploying it in their network or something like that. And we weren't making a distinction between them and the people who get the data off it. So my tentative thing is that for the purposes of this discussion, this is not a distinction that we're really making. But I want to confirm that with people in the room. I've got a lot of puzzled looks, which means maybe I was making a distinction that literally nobody else understood, in which case, yes, we're not making that distinction. Okay, good. So what we've got here is some total common ground, and I'm alert to the fact that we're 15 minutes away, so we're going to have to wind this up. But what we've got here is some tentative common ground, some beginning things. I will also take, I guess, the notes that we had from all the presentations and so on. Those can be circulated more widely. But at the very least, we can say that here is some common ground that we found that everybody seems to agree. We're only going to work on something with a 1-year horizon with a plan for something that's beyond that. But we're going to limit ourselves to things that you could do within a year, only so long as they've got a longer term picture. We're not going to define Internet of Things, but what we're going to do is talk about the problem things, the problems that we can work on that are within that 1 year. And one of the problems that we're going to work on in there has to do with education of humans. And there are at least 3 different kinds of things that we're going to do here, because we've decided that these 2 things are the same thing. So we're going to talk about the users of these devices, the things that we would want to say to them. We would talk about the purchasers of these kinds of devices, the sorts of people who make a decision to buy a thing and what they ought to do. And then we've got also the people who are developing or somehow deploying the industrial sort of application people of this, the bundlers and all the rest of that. And that's a separate sort of thing. And maybe this yields a certification thing. So those are the 3 things that I heard. And I've got 2 hands. Why don't we start there and come here? A 3rd hand, yeah.
And I think that the educate humans part is an indirect way to bring some economics and demand to the problem, which will then maybe nudge everyone to the right answer over time. Is that what the educate the humans maybe would do indirectly? Anyone? I'm getting some nods.
Thanks. I just want to make sure I understand. Did you, when you group together users and consumers, are you intending that to cover me when I sit down or when I bring an IoT device into my home, and the company that's receiving my data for some purpose? In other words, by consumer, did you mean data receiver or aggregator? I want to make sure I understand.
So that was the reason that I wrote these things down as separate things, and it became obvious when people were giving me the blank looks that they never thought of the receiver of this data as the person. So these are really two names for the same entity, which is the person who has the device or puts it in their network or uses it or whatever. That was the idea.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to
Okay.
make sure that
Sure.
you weren't putting both into user.
Nope. And so we've got 2 hands, one here and then there. Right behind you. Yep.
Thank you. In terms of the humans education, where would we put the smart city developers who make decisions on services and then infrastructure and user applications for tens of thousands of users?
That sounds to me like they're down here.
But they don't develop per se. They make a decision on what would be.
Yes, and that was why I started waving my hands about precisely what term we needed here. But the point is, these are the people who are making systems out of this stuff and deploying them into the world, selling them to other people, or developing smart cities or whatever, versus the demand side. I guess provider might be another way you could call this.
This is perhaps just definitional on users versus consumers. When you're talking about consumer protection, internationally and Canadian law on that, you're talking about, for the most part, individuals purchasing goods and services for their own personal or family use. So me buying something for my use at home, that's a consumer transaction, that's consumer education. If you're talking about me buying something for my use in my small business, that's not consumer. That would be user, that would be consumers a subset of it.
Right, but the key thing here was that we were focused here, I think, on the people who are making decisions about this use environment. So maybe the consumer word is just the wrong one. What I'm keen not to do here is to do a lot of fine discussion about the precise words, because that should be something that we work on as we produce the various documents here. But it's probably not something that we can do, in a room with microphones. So we'll need to work on documents to get exactly the right words. But I take your point, exactly correct. And so we've got one here and one there, and then I think we're going to call time at 10:02, right? So please.
So one of the online participants wanted to highlight the fact that public education may not be enough to resolve all issues in IoT. She said, for example, if I'm on a train that's derailed by an attack through some kitchen appliance on board, I'm neither a consumer nor a user, I'm just a victim. So she says that it's important to highlight those situations and figure out what goes beyond education to resolve issues in that kind of situation.
I think that's an excellent point. A really important point is that what we're developing here is a consensus on things we will do. That does not mean that this is like sufficient to cover all of the issues with the Internet of Things. It's just one of the things that we seem to be agreeing in this room to proceed from here. But I take the point exactly correctly that there's lots of stuff that this would not solve in the Internet of Things. For instance, it would not fix the problem that lots of people are using network address translation, which causes monitoring problems and so on. That's just an obvious thing that comes to my stupid mind. So I think that that's a general obvious point that there's more stuff that we need to pull out. So thank you.
Yeah, so I agree that it's important to make the distinction between the users, the consumers. So based on the intent or the purpose of how these devices are used is important while we're talking about it. But going along with the plan about the educating, I think what's most important is the general public, which is the consumers, the ones that are using it, because people who are in industry, people who are in the government, we have the resources and the time to look into it and to investigate it and to figure out what's best. But for the general public, they may not have the time or the resources, or they don't know what they don't know. So I think going with that, when we're trying to educate them, I think it's important that we don't have the doom and gloom aspect of IoT. So it can do a lot of good stuff and it could help them with their lives. So when we're educating them, it's important that we don't just go on the negative sides. And also part of educating them, I think the important part of it is that they just know how their data is being used while they're using these devices. So for example, if you have a light bulb, okay, and all it has is, what time you turn it on or off, that's okay. But if you have something that has a camera and it's on all the time, someone could do something with it, could hack into it. So I think what's important is that they know what is the possibility of what could go wrong, to inform them what they can do if something does go wrong. Do they contact the company? Do they talk to the government? What do they do? And also to get more information generally, like what she mentioned about keeping an updated information. So I think what would be great maybe would be a campaign by the government, for example, where you have advertisements about examples about what could go wrong and what people can do about it. And this during this whole process, the organizations or companies could help along the process as well.
So thank you. I think that's exactly. Is this working? Kind of. I think that's exactly right, but I think that it's a step beyond what we where we are today, because one of the other things about the multi-stakeholder process that Larry didn't mention is that most of the time you set a bar for yourself at the beginning of the thing that is too high to jump at the beginning of the day, right? So so what we didn't get to here is prioritizing what things we're going to do first, or who's going to do what, and so on. So that's actually follow-on work that I think would need to come from this. I think we got time for one more, or no? Yeah. Okay. So over here.
I think all of the tables mentioned supporting certification or a voluntary standard of some kind. Is that out of the scope of this group, or?
I don't know whether it's out of the scope of the group. I know that it's out of the scope of this topic, I think, because we didn't get that far. But I agree with you that another thing that came up very, very often was some kind of certification or device mark or something like that. Now, maybe that device mark does fit in this, or maybe it is a complementary effort. I don't know what the answer to that is, and I think that in 6 minutes we're not going to answer that question. But that's the nice thing about the internet. We can collaborate over the internet as we go on after this, and we'll have the opportunity to do that. And we won't all have to be in one room at the same time, which is the the other benefit, that people can do that asynchronously and so on. Also, I know there are going to be additional events after this, so there will be more opportunities to discuss this. Okay, so it seems to me that we've got some areas of consensus. And look, in a group this big, I have to say this is a remarkable achievement. This is a difficult topic. And what we've come up with today is, here are some things that we all think we ought to do together, and we ought to work on these things. We've got people from industry, we've got people from governments, we've got people from large companies and small here. So that to me is a really great sign. We've got civil society groups, we've got people from interests of all sorts. So I think that's really fantastic. And I see that Olaf has his hand up.
So I think there's an important distinction between what we all think that needs to be done and what we're willing to work on. I think you need to secure the commitment of the group that they're actually willing to work on some of the aspects of this.
So Olaf has been in a lot of standards making activities where lots of people think that somebody else should do a lot of work on something, and that would be really valuable. So now I really am going to make everybody hum, because nobody's going to put up their hand if I say put up your hands. But who is willing to work on at least some part of this package? Hum now. Who is not willing to work on any of this package? Who has no idea whether they're going to be able to commit to any work on this? So there are a few people who don't have any idea, but I heard a pretty strong agreement that there were people who are willing to work on some of this. And the normal way that we do that after that is that what we got to come up with next are some concrete steps that will have to be circulated after the fact, that will be the next things that go around for proposals, and then we get people to sign up and work on that. But it does sound to me, therefore, that there's some kind of interest in a multi-stakeholder working group of some kind here that people can come together and work in. So that to me is a positive result, and I think the follow-on results from that have to fall to the organizers of this, who have all of your email addresses and so on. See, you thought you were giving your email addresses just to get the confirmation. No. We know who you are, and we're going to contact you again. So with that, I think that it's time for me to hand this back to Mark. And to allow him to make the closing remarks. But the last thing before I do, I want to say to every one of you, thank you very much for working on this. I know that this can be sometimes a little frustrating. People come to you with some definition, and you're like, that's the stupidest set of words I've ever heard in my life, or no, that's really great, and you're talking with people maybe you don't know so well about something, and you're trying to be really polite about something that you think is dumb. So that's a thing that happens in these environments. It happens to me a lot, although people know better than to try to save my feelings anymore. So the nice thing about that is that we've all worked together really well today. I think this has been really productive, so I thank you very much. Give yourselves a hand. Thank you.
And thank you, Andrew. You did an amazing job with this group today. I think it was well facilitated.